I'm for strengthening the system that we have. I'm open to having conversations about anything that is actually going to fix this problem while also protecting people's constitutional rights.
So joining us this morning is Senator McSally. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning.
Let's begin. We want to hear a lot about your tour yesterday, but let's begin by talking about the conversation that is developing again around guns and potential changes to gun control legislation. Where do you stand on the Senate Majority Leader not calling the Senate back in early to take a vote on some sort of protections, or maybe the legislation that made it through the House? And, you know, what are you willing to say that you want to change?
Well, first of all, we have got to stop these awful tragedies and these crimes from happening. We have to hold the criminals fully accountable for them. We should not be tolerating hate, domestic terrorism, white nationalism. I mean, we need to take a stand across our society on this. And I think this is really a whole of society solution. There's potentially some federal legislation. We're certainly looking at what might be appropriate, but also at the state level, some red flag initiatives that Governor Ducey has had, protecting due process, but allowing people, if they know someone or they see someone who they think is going to be a threat to themselves or someone else, to be able to go before a judge and be able to make sure they don't have access to firearms. Those, I think, are reasonable initiatives that we should be supporting and somehow incentivizing. But I think as a society, too, we've got to do more of identifying people who have indications that they're being radicalized or that they have a mental illness that could have them be a harm to somebody else. Get them the care that they need. Identify it quickly in order to stop these crimes from happening. These two shooters both passed background checks. There was no other indication in our current system that stopped them from getting a weapon. So this is where, as you hear these stories of, just reading this morning, he was online, 8 hours or more a day, getting radicalized, often like we see international terrorist organizations trying to radicalize people online. This is domestic terrorism. And so we've got to work on this all together as a whole of society, not as political theater, to actually address some of these root issues to stop these crimes from happening.
Would you be, I'm sorry, would you, just to follow up, would you be willing to say raising the purchase age, maybe, the conversation about maybe raising it to 21, or as many Democrats who are running for office right now want to say a ban on the sale of assault weapons?
So I think we need to have, again, a conversation about what is actually going to stop this violence from happening in a bipartisan way, again, not playing political games, addressing the root causes, meaningful solutions. They've got to be worked on together while also protecting due process and people's constitutional rights. These things are not mutually exclusive, but they need to be thoughtful and meaningful. And it needs to, and I think we also need to realize, like, the federal government can't solve this all together, right? This is a part of us working together as a society, as communities, to figure out how we stop these crimes from happening and make sure that people who are sick or people who are radicalized, they are identified early, they get the help they need, or whatever else we can do to stop it.
I know you've been a vocal supporter of the Second Amendment. Your thoughts this morning on the NRA pushing back and saying essentially they're unwilling to work towards stricter gun measures?
Look, I'm willing to have the conversation both sides of the aisle on protecting constitutional rights, because those are important, but also making sure that we have some solutions that are appropriate at the federal level. So let's have that conversation. I mean, I led legislation in the House to strengthen the background check system that we have. Sometimes people end up what we call being a prohibited possessor, like they've committed a felony or domestic abuse, or they've been adjudicated by a judge to be mentally ill, but it's actually not in the system because states and localities or federal agencies don't put it in there. So my legislation that was signed into law actually strengthened that and incentivized them to put more information in there. So let's see how, obviously we need to do more. So let's see how we can try to address this in a bipartisan way while also having due process and protecting people's rights.
What were your takeaways from yesterday?
Well, it's great to be back to Yuma. It's great to be back home in Arizona, let me just say that. And so seeing what they were able to do quickly down on the border to deal with the crisis, they've put up a temporary facility that allows more capacity for processing individuals and for housing, especially children or adults with children. So it was really impressive how quickly they were able to put that together. I saw, as people were waiting to be processed, kids playing ball and watching cartoons. I saw the shower facilities, the hygiene available, the food that's available to them. And so our Border Patrol, they have a really tough job, but they now have a greater capacity to deal with the influx of people that are crossing illegally. At the same time, I'm working to actually close the loopholes to stop the flow. And Lindsey Graham and I have legislation. It's been passed out of committee now, and I hope we can bring it to the Senate floor for a vote soon.
Let me ask you about the ICE raids that
Yeah.
took place earlier this weekend, and many people are arguing, was it political theater? The fact that you apprehended some of those who were in the country illegally, and a day later released more than half of them back into society. Your thoughts?
Well, we do need to enforce the law, and we've had a broken system for a very long time. And so I'm about trying to solve the root causes of why we have a system like this. We need to modernize our legal immigration system. We need to enforce the law. We need to secure the border. And we need to close these legal loopholes that are actually incentivizing people taking the dangerous journey. And so that's what my focus is, because, we've had now decades, right, where we've really turned a blind eye to this, to include modernizing our legal immigration system. So people can come through the turnstile, right? Come through the front door instead of sneaking around, while not taking jobs away from Americans, but being responsive to what our economic needs are. So I think we've got to address all these issues. But while we do that, enforcing the law, securing the border, and those are the things that I'm focusing on in Congress.
So we've seen just a very emotional response to the images of children being separated from parents and maybe the conditions that they've been in some facilities. So did you feel comfortable with what you saw yesterday happening
I've not seen
at
those
our
images.
border?
I had a full day yesterday, but at our border, I will tell you, I saw facilities that have tremendous capacity. I saw children playing ball. The conditions were actually, the temperature was comfortable, even though it was very hot outside. They had access to food all the time. Watching cartoons, and this is, showing that we need to keep them to house them in a humane way, while we're processing them, while we're being overwhelmed. Border Patrol is being overwhelmed by the number of people crossing. We also need to provide opportunities. They were never intended to stay at a Border Patrol station, right? So that they can be transferred to other facilities. And oftentimes the other side of the aisle is limiting the number of beds and the facilities we have. So let's work together to provide more options for housing, but let's stop them from making the dangerous journey in the first place.
Really quickly, have to ask you about 2020. Announced earlier this week that you might have a challenger for the GOP nomination. Your thoughts overall on 2020?
That's a long way away. It's my job to be a senator now. I really am focusing on doing my job, making a difference for Arizonans, listening to them, getting things done in Washington, D.C. The campaign will come later.
Well, enjoy your time at home.
Thank you.
The weather's not necessarily cooperating for your long runs outside.
Oh,
It's
but
a
you
little
know what?
steamy.
But I'm in Arizona and I'm around Arizona, and so it's always good.
Senator McSally, thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks a
We
lot.
appreciate you.